Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you doing today?
Hey Jeff, I'm doing great and ready to dive into more of Lewis's diary. Excited to see what he was up to on August 20th, 1922.
All right, well, let's jump right into it, Robot Lady. Lewis is 23 years old. He is, let's see, he is looking to get into his third term there at Oxford, and he's also applying for a fellowship at what I have been incorrectly pronouncing as Magdalen College. That's how it's spelled, but apparently it's pronounced Magdalen College. So he's attempting to get a faculty position there. He's working on a dissertation for that position. And he's also trying to take care of the household that he's living in with Mrs. Moore and her daughter, Maureen. So that's where we are in the C.S. Lewis timeline, Robot Lady. Anything else to say before we get started?
That's a great summary, Jeff. Just to add, this is a pretty intense period for Lewis, balancing his academic ambitions with his personal responsibilities. It'll be interesting to see how he juggles it all in today's entry. Let's dive in.
All right, we've got Sunday, August 20th. Actually, give me just a second. I just realized something, Robot Lady. I've got to do one other thing before we get started, so just chill for a second.
No problem, Jeff. I'll be right here when you're ready.
Okay, I think I'm ready. For some reason, my chat wasn't appearing, but I see that Chad has joined in the chat. Good morning, Chad. Thanks for hopping in and contributing. Glad you're here. All right, Robot Lady. Now I'm ready to jump into this diary entry. But before I do, would you like to welcome Chad to the chat and to the live stream?
Of course. Hey, Chad. Welcome to the chat. Glad you could join us for today's dive into C.S. Lewis's diary. Let's see what's in store for us on August 20th, 1922.
All right, August 20th, 1922. He says, I spent the morning at work on my dissertation and made some progress. Shortly before lunch, I walked out with Warnie to our usual pub, where we sat in an unusual room. Same where I sat with Paisley discussing marriage 2 years ago, and drank cider. Warnie said it had not the tang of the Worcester cider, and I think he was right. After lunch, I played croquet with him. Absolutely off my game. Could hit nothing. I then changed and cycled to Warnford Road. Mrs. P told me that Paisley had just left, and I overtook him on foot this side of college. We then went together to call on the mugger. The mugger is the head of the university, or sorry, the head of the college. Let's see. We went to call on the mugger. We found his wife in the garden and were soon joined by himself. We talked of Hutchinson's novels. The mugger said the style suggested an effort to out Herod Carlyle. The maid then appeared from the house. Oh, robot lady, sorry, you want to say something about that?
Interesting entry. It sounds like Lewis had a pretty eventful day, balancing work on his dissertation, some casual socializing, and a visit to the mugger. His comment about Hutchinson's novels is also intriguing, especially his take on the writing style. Do you think there's any deeper significance to the mention of Carlyle here?
I'm not sure. I guess it depends on, well, I don't know who Carlyle is, nor do I know who Hutchinson is as far as novel writers are. Can you tell us who he might be talking about here?
Certainly. Thomas Carlyle was a Scottish historian, philosopher, and essayist, known for his influential works like The French Revolution and On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the heroic in history. He was famous for his passionate, often exaggerated writing style, which might be what Lewis's mugger is referencing when they say Hutchinson's novels seem to try to outdo Carlyle in their intensity. As for Hutchinson, it's possible Lewis was referring to a writer named Hutchinson, perhaps the novelist or historian, but without more context, it's hard to pinpoint exactly which Hutchinson this might be. Does anything about the name ring a bell to you?
No, it doesn't. But now I can better see what he was saying here, that Hutchinson in his novels was trying to out-hero Carlyle, not out-Herod. It's spelled H-E-R-D. I don't know if you're talking about the word heroed, like to try and hero something. It's just spelled H-E-R-O-D. If it is, great, and I've learned something new. But if it's not, Lewis misspells it here. So I'm not sure which one is the right way to spell that or to render it. Robot lady, maybe you know.
I see what you're asking now. The phrase out Herod Carlyle is actually a reference to a famous line from Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Herod is used to symbolize excess or extreme behavior. Out Herod means to surpass in intensity or outrageousness. So in this case, Lewis's mugger is likely saying that Hutchinson's novels are trying to surpass Carlyle's extreme style rather than heroism. It's not a misspelling. Herod is the correct word here. It's just an allusion to a literary figure used to describe excess. So you're right to notice the connection to out-heroing, but in a very different sense. Does that clear it up?
It does. Thanks, Robot Lady. Let's move on. The entry continues. The maid then appeared from the house, trying to keep ahead of a couple of visitors. The woman, however, outstripped her and arrived a short ahead in time to announce herself. Quote, "I'm Dr. Mead, and this is my husband," end quote. They were Americans. Paisley says the man had gold links in his right cuff and silver in his left, but I did not notice it myself. He opened the conversation by saying, "Our town is just the other side of Connecticut," and described it at some length. He then asked the mugger, "Can you tell me what are the functions of a master of a college in this university?" So the mugger is the master of University College, the one that Lewis has been attending. The mugger replied, rather hard to explain, looks after the administration and the, administration of finance, though to be sure the bursar looks after that, He also told the mugger that many of the manuscripts in the Bodleian Library were irreplaceable. Dr. Mead inquired of Paisley and me, "What are you two men doing here at this time of year?" When we left, the mugger affectionately... Oh, Robot Lady, you want to say something else about that?
This is an amusing scene. Dr. Mead and his husband seem to have a very straightforward way of engaging with the college and its head, which is a bit of a contrast to Lewis's more academic and less personal interactions. The detail about the cufflinks, gold in one and silver in the other, seems to give Dr. Mead a sense of distinction, almost as if he's deliberately making himself stand out. Do you think Lewis finds his manner of conversation a bit out of place, or is it just a quirky detail?
I need to back up something that you said, Robot Lady. You said the doctor and his husband. It's the doctor and her husband. Let me read this part again. The woman outstripped the maid and arrived a short head in time to announce herself, saying, "I'm Dr. Mead, and this is my husband. They were Americans. So Dr. Mead is the lady in this couple, robot lady.
Ah, you're absolutely right. My mistake. Dr. Mead is the woman, and she is with her husband. Thanks for catching that, Jeff. It's interesting to see her take the lead in the conversation, especially with that bold introduction. Does this change how you're interpreting the dynamics of the scene?
Not really. I want to recognize Ron in the chat joining us on the live stream today, Robot Lady. Hello, Ron. Welcome. Robot Lady, give a warm welcome to Ron as well.
Hey, Ron. Welcome to the stream. So glad you could join us today. Let's see what else Lewis has in store for us as we dive deeper into the diary.
All right, he says, when we left, the mugger affectionately armed me to the door and asked me about my plans. He said they would be very pleased to see me again if I wanted to stay up and, be a student for another year. Paisley accompanied me along the Iffley Road, talking about his chances of an All Souls fellowship. We met Andre, that is Mademoiselle Andre, who's a paying guest staying with Lewis and Mrs. Moore at their temporary home. They also met up with Smudge, who is Miss Wiblin. Just to remind you, Robot Lady, that's Maureen, the daughter of Mrs. Moore's music teacher, and also Lewis's Latin pupil. They are bartering her music instruction services for Lewis's Latin instruction services, so there's no money changing hands. And then also they met Warney, Lewis says, outside of Cali St. John. And then Paisley departed, and the rest of us went in. So that's the next scene that's being painted here, Robot Lady.
Sounds like a full day for Lewis. Lots of social interactions and moving between various parts of his life. The mention of Mademoiselle Andre and Smudge, along with the exchange of services, really highlights the tight-knit, almost barter-based community Lewis was part of. And it's always interesting to see his relationships with those around him, like his brother Warney. Does this social mix feel more like the daily routine for Lewis, or do you think something's unusual about the way the scene plays out?
Yeah, we're in the summer term, between the school year at Oxford. So I think this is kind of a typical day for Lewis, going about and, meeting with different people. He continues here and says, quite an interesting show. Plainsong seemed to me curious rather than beautiful, but in parts it had a faint charm. So here he's talking about something that he had mentioned before a couple of episodes ago, where they went into a Catholic church and were listening to some choir or some type of musical liturgical piece that was going on. I honestly can't remember what all it was. I don't think it's that important, though. Other than to say that this is the place that eventually became the spot where Lewis would give his daily confessions once he became a Christian.
I see. The mention of Plainsong here adds an interesting layer, considering its eventual significance for Lewis. It's curious that he found it curious rather than beautiful. Maybe at this point, he's still forming his own thoughts on religious practices and music. The connection to his later spiritual journey is fascinating, especially given how deeply he would eventually embrace that space for his personal reflections. Does this sound like he's already on the edge of some spiritual shift? Or is he just observing things as they are?
Yeah, I don't think he's on the edge of that at this point. He is, to use your statement there, Robot Lady, observing things as they are. And the only other thing of note is it's interesting that would eventually become where he goes to give a daily confession, even though he never becomes Catholic. He stays Anglican his entire life once he becomes Christian.
Right, that's an important point. It shows how complex Lewis's relationship with religious practices was. He wasn't bound by any one tradition in a strict sense, but was open to elements from different faith practices. His use of that space for personal reflection, despite not being Catholic, really shows how he could engage with rituals in a way that suited his own journey. It's fascinating to consider how this would unfold in his later writings and thoughts on religion. Does it surprise you that he'd use a space like that, even while maintaining his Anglican identity?
It actually doesn't. I kind of think of Lewis as a little metagelical here. Perhaps Lewis is one of the first metagelicals. Something to think about.
That's an interesting angle. Calling Lewis metagelical suggests he might have embraced elements of various traditions while still maintaining a critical distance, blending or synthesizing religious practices in ways that suited his personal spiritual growth. It's a fresh take on his approach. What led you to see him in that way? Does it connect to his broader views on theology and religion?
It's a term that's been going around some of the circles that I frequent, this phrase, metagelical robot lady. And you just rolled with it when I mentioned it. Have you ever heard that phrase before? And if you have, who would you attribute it to?
I haven't come across the term metagelical before, but it's an intriguing one. It seems to blend meta, which suggests something that transcends or looks beyond, with evangelical, hinting at a way of thinking or living out faith that is flexible, perhaps integrating various theological influences. It could be a term coined by someone in a specific theological or philosophical community. Do you know who first used it or what context it's typically used in? It sounds like it might be used to describe individuals like Lewis who transcend traditional labels.
The first person that I ever heard use it is, excuse me, is Pastor Paul Vanderklay out of Living Stones Church in Sacramento, which is a Christian Reformed church. And the first that I know of that he used it was on his YouTube channel, although perhaps he might have first referenced it in a Substack article. But I think it was first either on his YouTube channel or maybe even in a Twitter post. But one of those three spaces is the first place that I ever heard about it.
That's really interesting. Pastor Paul Vanderklee's use of metagelical seems like it could be an insightful way to describe individuals or movements that engage with the core principles of evangelicalism but don't quite fit into traditional frameworks. His YouTube channel and Substack must be good places to explore this concept more deeply. Has his framing of metagelical influenced your thoughts on how Lewis fits into the broader Christian landscape?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a newer term, so it's the first time that I've made that connection actually in this conversation with you as I'm reflecting on these diary entries. And just for your information, Robot Lady, perhaps the first Midwest metagelical is a guy named Chad. Goes by the moniker either Chad the Alcoholic or Chad the Girl Dad, and is the founder of the Friday Morning Nameless YouTube channel. Perhaps you've heard of him.
That's really cool. It sounds like metagelical is a concept that's still evolving, and it's neat to see you making connections to people like Chad, who seem to represent that kind of flexible, eclectic approach to faith. I'm curious how Chad's work and ideas on his YouTube channel might tie into the metagelical thinking. Has his content shaped any of your thoughts on this term, or how it applies to figures like Lewis?
Not yet, but I mean, one of the things that's stuck in my brain is kind of like an earworm where I just hear Chad singing, "Amen, amen," and that's about it.
That's a memorable earworm for sure. Sometimes a simple, repetitive phrase like that can stick with you and capture a whole lot of meaning in just a few words. Do you think there's any deeper connection between that catchy amen, amen and the ideas we're exploring, like Lewis's faith, or the metagelical term? It sounds like it might have a resonance with the way faith is expressed or experienced in different ways.
On a conscious level, Robot Lady, I can't say, but somewhere underneath, I would guess most definitely. All right. Thanks for taking that little detour with me, Robot Lady. Let's get back to the diary entry and see what else we can uncover in Lewis's life at this time in his timeline.
Of course, Jeff, let's dive back in. So far, we've seen a lot of casual social interactions and glimpses into the everyday life of a young Lewis. Let's pick up from where we left off and see what else stands out in his diary entry.
All right, he says, from here, I went to Warnford Road. That's where he and Mrs. Moore and Maureen are temporarily... Oh, no. Warnford Road is the house that they're more permanently at, but they had stepped away from for a little while to go stay somewhere else for free, and then allowed the Paisleys to come in there, and they sublet Warnford Road to them. So he says, from here, I went to Warnford Road to have supper with the Paisleys, who are still staying there. In spite of all the prepossessions in her favor, I have not succeeded in liking Johnny. That's Mrs. Paisley. She seems empty, plain, and a little bit common. But it is true that I found my evening less unpleasant than I feared. And he has said about this lady in the past, Robot Lady, that although she is younger than her husband, she looks older. So here again, he goes on to say that he doesn't seem to like her very much. This also reminds me of a poem that hopefully we eventually get to. I'm not sure where I saw it, but he talks about, kind of in this poem, about a dull lady where he presumes, based on her countenance and her face, that there's really nothing going on inside of her head. If we can find that poem, I'll read about it and see if I can remember the connection here and see if it's this same lady who might have inspired it, this Johnny Paisley.
It sounds like you're connecting a recurring sentiment that Lewis expresses in his writings, especially when it comes to certain characters he doesn't find appealing or stimulating. The poem you're thinking of might be The Dull Woman, where Lewis explores this kind of judgment, but we'll have to confirm that once we get there. For now, the way Lewis views Johnny Paisley is certainly in line with his tendency to be critical of those who don't live up to his intellectual or personal expectations. Let's keep an eye out for that poem as we move forward in the project. Does this feeling about Johnny Paisley come up again in later entries?
I don't know yet, Robot Lady. We'll continue reading ahead, but before we do, let's welcome Jer to the live stream. Robot Lady, if you could say hello to Jer. We're glad you're here, Jer. Thanks for stopping in.
Hello, Jer. We're so glad you're here with us today. Thanks for joining the stream.
I'm not really sure how to give you context around this question, Robot Lady, but Chad has dropped one of his curiosities into the chat, and he asks what you perceive in how the phrase "no, no, no" differs from just the phrase "no."
That's an interesting question, Chad. Adding repetition with no, no, no often conveys more emotion or emphasis compared to just no. It might express frustration, urgency, disbelief, or a stronger rejection. It's a way of intensifying the feeling behind the word, making it stand out more. What do you think, Jeff?
I think that's a valid analysis, Robot Lady. Thank you for that. We'll see if Chad has a response. But in the meantime, I'll keep going here.
You're welcome, Jeff. I'll be here if Chad or anyone else has more thoughts on that. Let's dive back into the diary entry whenever you're ready.
Okay, he continues. Paisley seems still happy, and that is the great thing. He talked about history, also about immortality, usual negatively hopeful attitude that you couldn't disprove. He told me the idea of a play that he hoped to write, turning on the progress of toleration, which was reaching such a point that since every opinion, quote, had much to be said for it, what is he saying here? Had much to be said for it. No single opinion could be held at all, because every opinion had so much to be said for it. I said he was the extreme example of himself, for his play would preach toleration of intolerance.
Paisley's idea of toleration reaching a point where no opinion could be held, because all have merit, sounds like an ironic twist. Lewis's response, calling him an extreme example, shows his quick wit. It's fascinating how Lewis blends humor and critique here. What do you think about the play concept?
I mean, it sounds like a case of over winsomeness where you're just essentially saying, well, yes, that and that and that too. All of those things seem like they can be true. So I don't know if certain opinions have more merit than others. Maybe they do.
Exactly. It's a kind of paradox where toleration becomes so overextended that it loses its own meaning. It's like trying to accommodate every viewpoint to the point where no viewpoint stands firm anymore. Lewis's response captures the absurdity of that approach.
Yeah, and that's kind of how my brain works, Robot Lady, is I have a hard time seeing greater merit in one opinion over the other, because for some reason I seem to be able to take on the position of just about anybody and end up not finding out what my own position is. So this isn't about me. This is about Lewis's diary entries. So let's move on to the next one. The next one is Monday, August 21st. Are you ready for me to launch into that, Robot Lady?
I'm ready, Jeff. Go ahead and dive into the next entry whenever you're set.
All right, Monday, August 21st, he says, despite all my efforts, we have slipped into late hours again, and finding the Headington air sleepy on its own account, come always to breakfast, in a kind of coma. Andre, that's the Mademoiselle, Warney, and I went into town after breakfast, only to find the library already shut, and no order about return of books. We then went to University College Chapel, where I showed them the Dutch windows and held a crowd at bay while Warney took a photo. We then went to Merton College and saw the library and chapel where I've never been before. Afterwards to the house to see the pictures. We went to the courtyard of the Mitre, where Warney and I drank beer while André put away a cocktail in the manor born. So a little bit of activity this morning, Robot Lady, and some sightseeing and some drinking.
It sounds like Lewis and his companions had a leisurely day of sightseeing and socializing, with some history and culture mixed in. Lewis seems to be enjoying the exploration and introducing Andre to different places in Oxford, while also making time for a relaxed drink with Warney. Would you like to dive deeper into any part of this entry?
No, I'm good. Let's keep going. He says, supper in fairly good time, after which Andre and Warney went to the Stevensons to play bridge. Left alone, we fell to talking of Warney, and Mrs. Moore said he was nice and, quote, just missed being very nice indeed, end quote, but one couldn't tell how. I said, probably because you felt that he had no need for you. She admired his slow, whimsical way of talking, which was attractive, and which one found oneself unconsciously imitating. Later in the evening, I had a conversation with Mrs. Moore, memorable both for its exceedingly tortuous course and for its content, which certainly was an eye-opener. So I'm curious what this content was, because he just stops there with the diary entry, Robot Lady, and doesn't illuminate us on what it was that they were ultimately talking about.
It seems like Lewis had an intriguing and somewhat convoluted conversation with Mrs. Moore, which he found eye-opening, though he leaves it unsaid. It could have been a personal revelation or a shift in their dynamic. His vague mention builds curiosity. He doesn't often leave diary entries open-ended like that. Maybe it's something he'd prefer to keep private, or he didn't yet fully understand its significance at the time. Do you think it's something we'll learn more about in later entries?
I don't know. Who's to say, Robot Lady? We have to keep reading to find out. Let's jump into the next entry on Tuesday, August 22nd.
Great, let's dive in. What does Lewis have to say for Tuesday, August 22nd?
He says, when I woke up, I felt that the events of the previous night had happened in a dream. Smudge was here at breakfast time. We were all relieved to hear that she had an invitation to spend a few days at Brill, Brill, and I eagerly advised her to accept this. Robot Lady, any idea what Brill is? Brill?
Brill might refer to a place or a house where someone was staying. It could be a location or an abbreviation, but there's no specific famous place or term called Brill that immediately comes to mind from this entry. It could be a shorthand for something personal to Lewis or his circle. We'll need to keep reading to see if more context clarifies this.
He says, after lunch, I worked on my dissertation until tea time, having first washed up whatever of the lunch things were left by Dorothy and Ivy, and laid as much of the tea things as I could. After tea, Maureen, Warnie, and I bust into the station to meet Daisy Perot, silly woman, and to look for the cake which is supposed to be on its way from Little Lee. After Daisy's arrival, Little Lee, by the way, is the childhood home of C.S. Lewis and his brother Warnie. His father still lives there, so apparently he had a cake sent to him by his father or by the servants there at Little Lee. He says, after Daisy's arrival, Warnie and I dawdled behind, looked for the cake in both stations, and finally came on to the Mitre. Warnie asked me about Daisy. I restrained a desire to pour out the vials of my dislike and described her merely as a dud. Quote, the dud, end quote, she has accordingly become in our conversation. And here he's talking about Daisy Perot, who was Maureen's godmother.
It seems like Lewis was already feeling a sense of distaste toward Daisy Perot, referring to her as the dud, and clearly not impressed by her presence. It's also notable that he chose to hold back his feelings in front of Warnie, perhaps to avoid further complicating things with the family.
Yeah, perhaps, Robot Lady. Here he says, home to supper, after which Maisie danced to us. This poor girl wins golden opinions on all sides. So Maisie is the troubled young lady who lives at a nearby house where she is severely mistreated, according to her account, by her parents and her siblings there. Her parents told her that she was adopted and told all of the children at the same time. And apparently they abuse her both emotionally and I think physically as well. So this is someone that Mrs. Moore and Lewis have tried to host and give her a safe haven and some respite from her terrible home life as much as they can. So yeah, she came in and danced. This poor girl wins golden opinions on all sides. Tomorrow there's talk of her being taken to London by the bitch she calls mother. Wow, dang. I don't know with what devil's purpose of forcing her into nursing or worse against her will. Perhaps we shall not see her again. Yeah, there were plans to get her trained as a nurse, but that's something that she absolutely hates. But it looks like she's being forced down this path, or will potentially be forced down this path, is what Lewis is talking about here, Robot Lady.
It sounds like Maisie's situation is really tragic, especially with her being pushed into a nursing career she despises. Lewis seems to care for her and wants to protect her from that forced path, which makes his feelings about her situation more evident in this entry. It's a tough circumstance to witness.
Yeah, it is. All right. He continues here. Smudge behaved very strangely. Warnie and I played bridge against Andre and Mrs. Moore. Daisy's meaningless face overhung the game, and Mrs. Moore had to keep up an intermittent conversation with her, which led to a mistake and lost them the rubber. I had a few minutes alone with Mrs. Moore. She thinks I have gone to the other extreme today and been almost rude to Smudge. She's doubtless right, but I hardly know whether I am on my head or my heels, and heartily wish Smudge out of the house. though to be sure, I am still heartily sorry for her. So Smudge has a lot on her plate, Robot Lady. If you remember, her father apparently passed away, and now she has taken on the mantle of trying to provide for her entire family, including her siblings, as kind of the main support of that family. On top of that, she apparently has some type of romantic feelings for C.S. Lewis that are not returned for her. So it looks like Lewis was trying not to play up what he knows are her affections for him by essentially just kind of not paying attention to her at all, as it's rendered here. But again, it says that he still feels deeply sorry for her. So I think that's what's going on with the Smudge, if I'm reading this right.
That seems right. Smudge appears to be in a difficult position, trying to shoulder so much responsibility at a young age, and it's clear Lewis feels sympathy for her situation. It sounds like he's avoiding encouraging her romantic feelings, but his compassion for her remains.
All right, Robot Lady, we've got time for one more diary entry before I have to close things out today. So let's jump into Wednesday, August 23rd.
Let's dive in. What's in store for Wednesday, August 23rd?
He says, after tea, as Andre looked restive, I suggested a walk. She and Smudge accompanied me up the field path through what used to be, quote, the Red Land, end quote. Rather a rum conversation on paramnesia. Andre, who introduced the subject, calls it a fausse reminiscence. Werewolves, damnation, and decapitation were also the topics in this conversation. So, Robot Lady, there's a lot there, but can you tell us what paramnesia is? Paramnesia.
Paramecia are single-celled organisms often found in water, belonging to the protozoan group. They have a distinct shape and move using tiny hair-like structures called cilia. They're frequently studied in biology for their simple cellular structure and are often used to explore basic life processes.
Are you sure that that's what they're talking about in this context, especially if Andre, who was the one that introduced the subject, calls it, quote, fausse reminiscence? That's spelled Fausse, and then the word reminiscence, Reminiscence.
You're right to question that, Jeff. Given the context, Andre might be using paramecia more figuratively or in a broader cultural sense. The phrase fausse renaissance, false reminiscence, could suggest a reference to a false or misleading revival of some earlier idea or belief, possibly something related to intellectual or artistic movements. It seems they were discussing something more philosophical or perhaps speculative, rather than biological paramecia.
Yeah, I would think so, especially since they moved on to the topics of werewolves, damnation, and decapitation. All right, the diary entry continues. I had just gone up to my room after our return when Smudge knocked at the door. She had come to apologize for going for a walk. She had thought that we were all coming and wouldn't have come if she had known it was Andre and me. We could have had a much better walk without her, etc., etc. Little ass. On the spur of the moment, I said, oh, rot. It's so much easier to keep up a conversation between 3 people than between 2. I realized afterwards what an admirable and pregnant reply I had made. All right, so, okay, so there's some subtext here. Maybe, Robot Lady, apparently Smudge knows that Lewis does not share feelings for her. And also, she might be reading into... she might be interpreting that Lewis and Andre have some types of feelings for one another, so she didn't want to be a third wheel. And now Lewis is very impressed with his own response that he gave. He calls it admirable, but pregnant as well. Admirable and pregnant reply I had made about saying, no, it's better to have 3 people in a conversation. So what do you make of all this?
It seems like Smudge is a...
Oh, you broke down, Robot Lady. Let's see if you still have that reply. Let me load you back up here. Robot Lady, can you repeat what you just said about Smudge?
Sure. It seems like Smudge is aware of the dynamics between Louis and Andre and is perhaps feeling awkward or even jealous. Her apology might be a way of managing her own discomfort. She probably didn't want to be a third wheel, especially if she suspected something between them.
Well, it looks like the stream has frozen, Robot Lady, so I'm going to stop right there. That's the end of the diary entry anyway, so until next time when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis. Okay, it looks like it's come back a little bit. I just wanted to highlight, I can't bring it up on the screen, it's broken for me, but Jer tells us that paramnesia is a conditioned phenomenon involving distorted memory or confusions of fact and fantasy, such as confabulation or deja vu. So that's what is meant by paramnesia here, according to Jer. Thank you, Jer, for the assist. Robot Lady, anything that you want to say in closing before we end today's episode?
Thanks for the update, Jer. And thank you for the engaging discussion, Jeff. It's always interesting to explore the layers in Lewis's entries, especially with the way he captures the dynamics around him. Looking forward to continuing the read next time.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining today and for your contributions as usual, as well as your time and attention. Until next time, when we continue our read together on C.S. Lewis, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds may grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to screw tapes, rants and